Hey folks, Michael here with the CCERP podcast, Cypress Creek Ecological Restoration Project. Back again. Today, a new topic. We've been doing a bunch of kind of rewilding yourself, thinking about your ecology and your own nature. And today it's a little bit about nature itself. We need to learn more about that. We got some mistakes we make, every human being does, just like we might think of development as improving the land. You put down concrete, you put up a building, things are better, but it's not always the case. We got to think about what's good for nature, what's good for us, how things work at their best, how do we work at our best, what's a good environment for us. And living along the creek, we got that to consider. We got a creek, we got the animals there, we got the plants there. Of course, as you know, unfortunately, our creek floods. Hurricane Harvey, a lot of flooding we had before that. Seemed like it happened 2 or 3 times a year for a while there. But we got to think about, because of that, we want, got the animals, the plants, the flooding. What makes a healthy creek? What's a good thing to do so it's better all around, so we can minimize flooding and, of course, injury, death, loss of property, loss of wealth, and have a creek that we live along that functions best for all involved. So today we're going to talk about someone who knows about that, Bob Freitag. Bob, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Bob Freitag, and I teach at the University of Washington. I'm a senior instructor, and I'm the director of the Hazard Mitigation Center. I've been here 20 years. I can't believe it, but 20 years. I teach classes in floodplain management, hazardous mitigation, which really addresses earthquakes and wildland fires currently. That's our big interest area here. And, of course, on resilience, community resilience. So I've taken a deep dive into that and learning a lot. Before I came here, I'm going to have to talk really softly. I think I'm losing my voice. I'm going to try water. Before I came here, I worked for FEMA. I was the federal coordinating officer with FEMA, Region 10. So I was the fellow that when there was a disaster, would go to the disaster and coordinate federal activities for the disaster. My background, so I was there 25 years. And while I was with FEMA, I was the federal coordinating officer. I was the public assistance officer. I was the education officer as I kind of worked up the food chain. And I left. I had a very responsive, fun job, but I would be out 8 months. So that creates a little havoc with your family and friends.
Slightly.
So they gave me an opportunity to retire early, and I did. Before I went to FEMA, I worked for a consultant firm in Australia, and we looked really at Newtown planning, and I became exposed to hazards when they had a huge cyclone hit Darwin. And we did not get the contract, but I worked a lot on the contract. So when I came back from Australia, I kind of sought that field out and took a job with FEMA before it was FEMA, to show you how long that was. I started out this whole process, and I think we're getting to the end of it, but as a school teacher. So my first degree is in elementary education, science education. And so I was a school teacher, and was the only job I could have after a while was intermediate school, and I did not like intermediate school kids. I have to say that when I was in my 20s. Now I tried to go back. When I left FEMA, I instead of going to the university, I tried to get a job here, and as a school teacher. And I was told I had to go back to school to become certified. They were absolutely correct with that, but I didn't, so I went to the university. So that kind of gives my history in a nutshell.
So now you get to deal with old third graders.
No, I use the same techniques, by the way, and the same class techniques, and with graduate students, and it works well. I had one graduate student. I do a lot of storytelling, and I had one graduate student that had a very difficult time with that. And by storytelling, I mean that we would, set a stage, and then we would tell a story. And stories are driven by conflict and change, and that was a flood or an earthquake or something. And they would introduce that change to a community that they liked and could describe. And then they figured a way to resolve the change in a story format, really making it fairly personal. And it's worked out very well. But there was one student, who said, "My gosh, this is silly, and we're not being, as direct as we should and as serious as we should." So would have done that. Where my interest lies currently is really, and very broadly, and I think it addresses what you're dealing with, is how you live in a dynamic environment. So if the problem that we've had as people is we like to build something and then we go on to something else. Now that's fairly recent. Indigenous populations would build mobile homes or mobile settings, and they would shift as the environment shifted, and they could live fairly well in a dynamic environment. But we like to put a house there, and we make it out of concrete. Even when we made it out of wood, we had a foundation for it. Didn't really relish the opportunity to move at different places. So I've kind of summarized most of the problems we have a stream or a water course or some environment that is very dynamic, and it should be dynamic. And the stream should go from one side to the next side. It goes from fine sediments from fine sediments to coarse sediments, and it moves. And so as it's meandering, it should be allowed to. And plants along the side of it, the riparian areas and the hyperuric areas, they evolve, and they should evolve. So, and we like to make them. We want to make that subdivision right next to the river, and we all know of subdivisions where they try to meander the river and harden it and make it into an open channel, and they have homes on both sides, and that's the way they want it to be. And the self-correcting nature of just our environment is wonderful to witness. Ours is not self-correcting, our built environment. And so how do we have this self-correcting landscape where trees grow and they fall in, and then the environments change? And we have a very hard time with that.
Interesting. And it's I was thinking of a lot of stuff while you were saying that. So it's like, where do I go from here? But it's interesting talking about people wanting to control rivers. In some ways, that comes up in other aspects of the culture, just like we want to control kids. Instead of, just as people don't want to let rivers be rivers, they don't want to let kids be kids. And that has a detrimental effect. So that's like something good people can think about is like, okay, if you have kids sit 8 hours a day in school and not move and take away their recess, so allegedly they can be smarter by studying more, and they're just going to sit when they get home, and they sit in a car and sit at the table. Look what's happening. Obesity, dysfunction. They're not really getting smarter. They're not able to focus as well because they're not moving. So people need to learn to live with chaos and dynamism, kind of controlled chaos and dynamism, with kids if we want them to be healthy and we care and we love our kids and our friends in the future. And you can take that and I think apply that to the creeks and streams and rivers. It's like,
and if I can kind of build on that, I think that kids, including my adult students, we have a population that doesn't connect with the outdoors. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether they think it's a video game or whatever, but they're not connecting with the outdoors. I've had classes, and every class that I teach, we have a class product or project where we have to look at the stream. We have to see where it's going. We have to kind of feel and smell it. And I had this one class, and at the end of the class, and I should have known better, I said, "What did you think of the stream?" Well, they hadn't visited. Well, it's only about 20 miles away. They said, why should we? We have orthophotos. We have some GIS layers. I can't see any reason. And so then I'm going to end this. But it reminds me, Pat Suzuki, who was Canadian, who, when I grew up, had a TV show, and I think where we only had 5 stations then, or 3 major stations. And he said that, somebody asked him, well, what do you feel about the discussion of wildlife and nature that's over public media? And he said, well, when I was younger in the 60s and maybe up even into the 70s and early 80s, I had one show. I had one show a week. We had 3 stations, and in the evening, I was 1/3 of the audience. And we talked about evolution. We talked about the importance, and we did a deep dive into nature. And he says, now, we have 1,000 stations just all over, and we don't have any real nature shows that talk about or have a deep dive. We have shows where the animal fights, or the cutest animals, or the prettiest animals, but in talks and people are not talking about the relationships. Ecology is all about relationships, and between the natural environment and between the parts of the natural environment, the geology and the biology, and we just don't have those discussions. And so students are becoming illiterate in terms of their relationship to nature, and it's very sad, and it shows up in the classroom. I mean, people complain about just having students that can write. And I think students write well. They write differently now, and the progression that I've seen, they're crisp sentences, which are very good, but the thoughts don't evolve. I mean, it's like they're trying to do a text for Twitter or something, and they want to get the thought out in 120 characters or something. But in terms of a deep dive, it's just more difficult. And as I said, it's just. There's not the understanding between the physical environment and the biological environment, and or the curiosity.
Yeah, I'm a teacher, so I know what you mean. Unfortunately,
it's terrible.
But that reminds me of one movie. I forgot what it was. Robin Williams, I think. If it's him, he was a teacher. If it's the right movie, but might have been in that Captain O'Captain movie. But
it's not ringing a bell. I was thinking of Good Will Hunting, actually, when you were talking.
It might be that or some other. I don't remember, but I know there was forget which movie it is, but one character was talking about seeing the Sistine Chapel. Yeah, and it's kind of like you said. Yeah, I saw it. Like I saw a picture.
That was Good Will Hunting. That was Good Will Hunting. Right?
Yeah, and then remember the scene.
Remember that.
Then he says, "No, you haven't. Like, until you've been there, you don't know the Sistine Chapel. You got to go there and feel it and smell what it's like and see it on different lighting throughout the day and all this stuff. It's like same thing with nature. It's not just seeing it on video or pictures. It's like totally different. You got to go there."
And in terms of, when you were talking, it reminded me of some research that was done on Yellowstone. And I think it was done by a Davis professor by the name of Ripple. And I'm probably going to correct myself after the podcast is over. But,
yeah, I do that.
But he was looking at wolves and coming out of Yellowstone. He was looking at a stream. And he was studying kind of the same streams over many, many years. And the streams that he studied initially were fairly warm. They had a lot of sediment in them. They had the fish count was very low. Oxygen level was very low. And they just were not healthy streams. By healthy streams, I mean that they were not self-correcting organisms, really, that evolved with the landscape. So, but then he noticed over a period of time, the streams became more vegetated. They became cooler. They ran clearer. The percentage of life was more diverse and greater. And he kind of went back and he studied it, and he said, I think it's wolves. The only change that I can picture that's happened is the reintroduction of wolves.
Mm-hmm.
And so he looked at the wolves and he said, well, the wolves, keep the elk away from the streams because they can patrol the streams fairly easily. The elk cannot eat the foliage, and the foliage gets a chance to develop. So the trees grow, the beaver comes back. The beaver comes back, the water becomes more consistent because you have a dam or something. It becomes more consistent, the wildlife becomes, or the plant life becomes more diverse. And then you have, with the plant life becoming more diverse, you have more areas for natural filtering of the stream and hardening of the banks. Hardening is not the right word, but protection of the banks with, root structures. And so he noticed that after a while, the introduction of wolves caused the streams to be clearer, to be healthier. I mean, that's kind of an anthropomorphic word, but they were self-adapting and self-changing, and they had the biodiversity. Whenever you have a rich biodiversity, you have an area that is more resilient and more susceptible to change, can handle change easier. If you have these monocultures, as we know, you can't. But if you have a diversity, almost the greater diversity and the greater complexity you have in a system, the more resilient it is. And resilient being that it's self-correcting. And it can evolve. It doesn't mean it stays the same, but it's self-correcting. And it was wonderful. And so the whole idea of wolves and the reintroduction of wolves is a very positive thing. Now, the ranchers are a little bit, ticked off because every once in a while a cow gets it. And my wife is a rancher, and so she has concerns about that. But there's a cost in removing the wolves. And the cost is that maybe what you can do is you can have people be wolves and, have everybody with their gun walk up and down the stream bank, twice a day to keep the elk away and the deer away. And maybe, that will solve the problem. And then you could, but a wolf does a fantastic job of, they may not eat a lot, but they certainly do a lot of scaring. Mm-hmm. And they kind of
and we don't have to pay them.
The prey. We don't have to pay them. So, but that relationship, I think, is what's really important. And when you talk about any stream, and you've talked about it, if you let it be, you can. It likes to be self-correcting in the way that it has been. Now, we have some real changes with climate that are happening, and we can talk about those. That we're now self-correcting into kind of a new order, a new regime, a new domain. But we still have to allow it to self-correct. So I think if there's a rule of thumb. And you mentioned it, just let the stream be. If you can, you have setback from it, let it be. And, try to have a little, impact and footprint as you can. And you do that. And as I said, we'll put a hard piece of concrete. If you put a concrete in the edge, then you take the whole energy. So if you put some kind of a levee at one side of a river, so now, with all that energy is changed. A river, you can look at a river from a physics standpoint. It was just an energy grade line. So you've got all the water representing energy. And when the energy, is delayed in one area, it doesn't go away. Laws of conservation of energy just move someplace. And so if you, try to divert the energy and protect one area, that energy is going to reappear downstream farther. And so you protecting your home by putting a levee in has to, absolutely, the law of physics, that energy has to go someplace else. And that someplace else, if you don't like them, or that's okay that erodes, that's fine. But you can kind of, if you just close your eyes, you sit by a river and kind of be the river, and you can kind of see that where the energy is going, and the energy is coming down. You can see it in the waves and the amount of water, and it's like a wave. It has troughs and it's a wave from a horizontal standpoint. Just think of a snake on the ground. That river is a wave moving down, and it's also a wave the other way as it goes from riffles, runs to pools. It's a wave that way. And if you look at a drop of water in the headwaters of the stream, that drop of water before it reaches the Gulf, may go into the ground, maybe in the water, maybe in the stream, may move way out into the edge of the plume of groundwater that surrounds most streams if there's permeable soil. And so you've got all of this action going on, and you kind of have to be that. And through time and space, and it's fun. I had a Volkswagen in college, like everybody had a Volkswagen, right? And so the Volkswagen was the most simple engine. It had maybe 20 moving parts. I don't know. It had 4 cylinders, and it had some rings, and it had all that. And so there was a book that was written called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Mm-hmm. And on the book, it showed a person in a yoga position in floral, because it was the 60s, right, and 70s, and thinking about the engine and just becoming the engine and tracing the engine and to find out the problem. Because with only 20 moving parts, the Volkswagen engine always had something that was stuck, and it had a third cylinder. If you've ever worked on a Volkswagen engine, it had that third cylinder on the left inside toward the front that no air ever got to. And so that always was, you always had to replace that head or something. But you kind of think, and I've had my students do this, just sit by the river and don't say anything, just become the river and trace a piece of floating debris as it comes down, and then think about it over time. And do the same with the shoreline. I mean, if you do a shoreline and you kind of, there's a literal drift along a shore, and so you watch the sediment come and go. There's a summer-winter effect in most shores, and there's a loss of sediment. So sediment has to, come from the land, and so those eroding bluffs provide the beaches that you have. And you
really quickly, by literal drift, you mean like logs and stuff like that, right?
No, literal drift along the coast is when you have a coastal current that goes north-south, or it goes along the coast, and it brings sediment in, and the beach kind of changes it, and so the sand is built up, but that sand actually moves onto the beach, off the beach, onto the beach, off the beach, as it's deposited and eroded away, and it's called. And I'm not even sure if that's correct. It could be littoral drift, I guess. I always call it a little. I'm from Chicago. And,
I'll look it up and put it in the show notes for folks.
Yeah, but it's an interesting thing, because nature is very dynamic. It's changing, and right now, as the climate is warming and we have all that extra energy in the atmosphere, that energy has to go someplace, and so you can basically, or around the most basic level, look at the world, because the climate is world connected. Mm-hmm. So a tree that you plant in Texas will have a positive effect on absorbing carbon in Bangladesh. I mean, we're all this one big system. But if you look at the heat that's remaining, you're just taking a rheostat. You're taking the volume knob of a radio and turning it up, and all that energy is now in our system, and that energy has to go someplace. The energy is either stored or it's doing something. Weather is something that it's doing. So you can actually trace, if you have anything, if you have a tree along the side of a levee, and that tree gets washed in. Well, that tree gets washed in because water eroded it. Water eroded it because it came upstream. It came upstream because there's a reservoir or something upstream that produced the water. Well, it got in the reservoir because of rain or other streams, and rain, fell because it actually was the water, the moisture in the ocean, reached the sky and fell in. So as the earth becomes hotter, you have the oceans becoming hotter. You have the air around it becoming hotter. That absorbs more moisture, so you have more evaporation. You have more evaporation, you have more rain. So if you just look at that tree falling in, you can trace that back to climate very easily. And when you turn up the knob and increase the amount of energy in the system, all of a sudden you can say, well, the chances of that tree eroding now are, stronger and than they were, 10 years ago when we didn't have all that energy. So you can actually trace that energy. Energy is second law of thermodynamics, or was it the first? But energy can change. Just like you can take heat in a stove and make it steam, and then you can put that steam into a locomotive and make it mechanical, going back and forth to move the wheels. You can put it through some kind of an alternator and make electricity out of it. Energy doesn't really stay there. It does something. It does work, and that work, can be a whole different kinds of things. But you're just taking that rheostat with climate change and switching that puppy up and having more work done. And more work is more weather, or it's more erosion, it can even be more drought. Drought is that work, changes the Gulf Stream and moves it in a different direction. But, so now we have a situation where, the rivers want to be and they want to change, and they're going through a system that was somewhat constant over the last, in the Northwest. I'm going to have to go back to the Northwest, but our streams have their roots in 13,000 years ago because the glaciers retreated them. Mm-hmm. So generally, if you look at our landscape, during that period is when you kind of say they were cyclical. Well, now they're changing. They're not becoming cyclical. They're actually changing into a new system because the climate is warming. So here we have in the Northwest, in beautiful downtown Seattle, we have streams that come off the Cascades. The Cascades are fairly low mountains, 4,000 and 5,000, 6,000 feet. And those mountains, we have a lot of rain in Seattle, in case you haven't heard. And in the winter, our streams are fairly heavy. They're big flows in them. But some of that rain falls as snow. And then during the summer, in June and July, we get a second peak for the streams. So they're usually always full. We're now having a period where it's not falling as snow. It's running off. So we're having bigger flows, larger flows in the winter months. And some of our streams are looking like they're going to become intermittent in the summer. Well, all of a sudden, the biology of those streams, and not just the zoology, but the plants and everything, we're used to those two cycles. That summer melt provided water in the spring, and that's when you have the rejuvenation. And so our mountains are tending to die now as things are becoming hotter. And then I can put on top of that fire. We have, Australia is having these huge fires that is nobody in the scientific community does not feel that there's, I think, three negatives in that, but that the Australian fires are not climate change related. Our fires up here are climate change related. Not that they never happened before, but they're happening with greater consistency because, again, that energy has to go someplace. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's just transferred. It comes from the sun. It's here. It's trapped with the greenhouse gases. Now we have all that energy. I guess the positive thing is that you could make use of that. I mean, if you have that energy, will be more wind in areas. It'll be more rain in areas. It will be more sunlight in some areas, or hotter in some areas, not more sunlight. And you can convert that to energy. And so I guess as we have more energy in the atmosphere, we can convert more of that energy to fit our needs. So that may be a positive thing. So, but I think when I to put a conclusion on this, let streams be. They'll kind of self-correct and they'll kind of, go back to a system of a dynamic system that kind of replenishes themselves and corrects the self-correcting. However, as the climate is changing, that self-correcting may be to a different a different regime. And it may have there's a long-term effect. When you look at the very disturbing part is when you look at ice, the ice sheet is melting. And so we had a lot of sunlight hit the ice fields, the sea ice, and reflect back out of the Earth's atmosphere. Well, now as it's becoming warmer, we have less ice. The less ice we have, the less reflection. The less reflection, the hotter it gets. The hotter it gets, the more ice melts. The more ice melts, the less reflection. The less reflection, the hotter it gets, the more ice melts. And so, if you go down to permafrost, the permafrost is releasing methane. And so the more methane is released, that's a greenhouse gas, the hotter it gets. The hotter it gets, the more methane released. The more methane released, the hotter it gets. And if you look at our forest fires, our forests were always, they sequestered carbon. So the trees are carbon. And so when they burn, they actually release carbon. So the more forest fires we have, the hotter it gets, the more carbon in the atmosphere. The more carbon in the atmosphere, the more reflection down to the earth, the hotter it gets, the more forest fires we have. So we have all of these cycles. And I haven't even talked about bare earth or the ocean yet. But all of these...
that stuff is complicated and complex as hell.
But it's not. It's not complex. These are just reinforcing loops. You can understand this. I think a fourth grader can understand this. If you take permafrost. If you have permafrost and it's melting and it's releasing methane, the methane will make things hotter. The hotter they get, the more methane would be released. And you have a reinforcing loop in a negative sense. And I think that that's very easy to understand. I don't think that's complex. You start to put numbers to it, it tends to be kind of complex. And also, one system reacts to the other system, and that can be complex.
Right. Yeah.
But I think that to me, it's very easy to understand. If you look at just the basic laws of thermodynamics, you'll have a standing of how we are going really from one system, fairly self-correcting system. We're going from that to something that is totally new and is not self-correcting. And, whether we can change it or back or not, I think there's still, it's still out on that. I think that if we hold back carbon, since we produce the carbon that was the trigger to this, if we start to hold back that carbon, I think we can stop some of those thresholds from being reached. But we have positive signs. I mean, we have British Petroleum in our paper in Seattle. We have a big British Petroleum plant. They are saying that they are going to support carbon, programs to put cost on carbon. And also Shell is doing the same thing. So they're within 20 years, they say that they're going to try to go out of the fossil fuel industry slowly, and they are going to start to capture new economies. However, we have a government currently that is I've never seen anything like this, sticking their head in the sand. I had an uncle, so I love my uncle, and we used to play Scrabble. And he was Danish. He was from Denmark, and he was really obstinate. I'm not going to make any more generalization than that. But so this one time we were playing Scrabble, and there's this one word that came up, and I can't remember if I said the word or my father said the word. We played together as a family, but he said that's not a word. And so, well, we go to the dictionary. And so he went to the dictionary and he saw the word, and he tore the page out and he said, it doesn't exist. The word doesn't exist.
I've dealt with people like that before.
And so, so fine. I guess if you want to deal with climate change and say, things are not happening when they're happening all around you. I mean, at some point, the king has no clothes. And so, but I'll ask you to, ask other questions. We're kind of getting on a tirade here.
It's all right. So it's kind of why we're here for a guest to talk. It's not my show. If it was just me, then it'd just be me talking the whole time. But hear what people have to say about climate, ecology, make connections, And it's one good thing people will get to hear about in the podcast is relationship between creeks and climate, not just take it out of context. More things to consider. But so with the stuff you said, so you think it'd be, instead of being better, like, oh, the creek might be, maybe there's more rain and it's not self-correcting as much. So some people might think we got to put concrete down now because things have changed and we got to control it and it's out of control. But you think that that's actually would be wrong, and it's the opposite, that we need to plant more trees and let it release energy through all these different mechanisms by keeping it natural.
You kill Peter to save Paul. So if that energy is coming down the stream and you put a piece of concrete in it and it hits that piece of concrete, there's a cost someplace. When you make a change in one area, you make a change in another area, because that energy doesn't stop at that bulkhead you put in or that foundation for a building you put in. That goes farther downstream, and it can. Everything's connected to everything else. So I'm not against concrete. I guess concrete, produces a lot of carbon in its making, but it certainly lasts for a long time. Mm-hmm. But even though the concrete lasts for a long time, in these very dynamic environments such as stream beds and alluvial areas and beaches, the actual beach will not last as long as that structure will last. And that structure will have an effect on that beach for a long period of time. And it's well known, if you have a beach that has any energy at all and you put in a bulkhead, that sand in front of the bulkhead is going to disappear. The waves are going to come in. It's going to concentrate that energy and remove it. And so you protected your home. You've lost the beach. You may have moved there from the beach, but you protected your home. And okay, that's the cost. If you want to do that, that's fine. But you're probably hurting somebody else. Well, what's the recourse? Well, you set back, but then how about all that land? And there also is, there are a lot of environmental engineers that are going to question what I say, because there's some systems where they think they know, and I think they probably do. They know that if you do put a bulkhead in, or you put in a piece of concrete, you can deflect the energy in such a way that it cause no harm or will cause a beneficial element. So if you have a stream flowing down and you put in a piece of concrete that deflects the water away from your side of the stream to the other side of the stream, that can be considered okay. If you want to make a deposition area on the other side of the stream, you just can't look at where you're putting that concrete. Again, you've got that whole energy environment that you have to trace where that's going, and there are a ton of models that do that, but you can't not ignore it. The other thing is that the team has to be fairly large. An easy course is to let the stream be and kind of do what it wants to do. And then once you kind of understand the way it's going, you can kind of build around it. Mm-hmm. But if you do, try to direct that energy and do something that is with a little bigger footprint, then you really have to have a bunch of specialties, and you have to have people that understand the geology. So you need a stream morphologist. You have to have people understand the flow characteristics. So you need somebody that can do some hydraulic modeling. You need a biologist, because you have to know generally the self-correcting nature of plants and root systems and how that's going to affect. Mm-hmm. You have to know what the zoology is, because those plants are dependent upon the zoology for seed dispersal and all that. So as soon as you start monkeying around, because we thought as a country, here's a story. There's a great book called Rising Tide about the Mississippi. And again, I can't think of the author, and it's a great book, and I'm not doing him any credit by saying that. But so in the 1860s and before, all the logs from Iowa and the grain went on a one-way trip to New Orleans. because you couldn't really get up the Mississippi. So they would build a barge, and they would fill it full of grain from Iowa and Illinois and Minnesota. I think Minnesota's not too far up, and they would float it down. And then when they got the grain down there, they would sell it, and they would sell the boat for lumber. And then paddle wheels kind of came about and steam, and then they kind of worked their way up the stream. So now you could actually bring it down and bring it back up. But the Mississippi was always changing, and so you had areas that were deep, you had areas that were shallow, and those were changed because rivers, change from side to side as they meander. They also change in terms of, riffles, pools, and runs, and the bed of the river changes. And so they were saying, my gosh, all that change is caused by, all these trees are coming in. They're calling these tree roots are coming in, and they're stopping the drainage of the river. So what we're going to do is get rid of those snags. So they got rid of the snags, and that didn't really help. They said, well, by gosh, those snags are coming from trees. So if we just get the trees down, we don't have trees along the Mississippi, we're not going to have snags. And we don't have snags, we're not going to have a sediment pile up. Well, what that happened is they took the trees out, and it released all that sediment. Now the sediment was totally filled. And they said, okay, well, I guess what we'll do now is we'll make a levee. And if we make a levee and confine the river, it's got to go faster, because when you confine it, that energy is now between let's say half a mile and a mile. So you concentrate that energy, and it's got to wash that sediment out. Well, then they committed themselves to making levees on the whole Mississippi River. And when if they had, if they had just let it be, they could have worked themselves around it and had much less, I think, of a long-term impact. We now have a dead zone outside of the Gulf, outside of New Orleans, a huge dead zone, because there's not that natural riparian filter that used to be there. And so, I mean, here you're killing Peter to save Paul. So if you look at the cost of levees and the cost of that dead zone and the cost of the adverse effects of that river, and there was a film out, and I wish I had the film. The film has been destroyed by the Corps, and I don't think it was maliciously destroyed, but it was called Taming the Tiger. And it was by a bunch of engineers from the Corps of Engineers, and I love the Corps. They did some great work. But this film said, by gosh, we have tamed the Mississippi River. It no longer floods like it used to. We are in control of the Mississippi. And that the whole purpose of the film was it was a big salesmanship. And so it just, sometimes we build a hammer and we look around for a nail. So we have this tool that we think we control the river with, a levee. So by gosh, we got to use it. So.
That's too bad. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I think the most absurd example of that is from my generation is that after we bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we had, military bombs. And so I think the people that made them, William Teller and Oppenheimer and the rest, thought that, my gosh, that's a bad thing. We just killed a bunch of people. But there has to be a good part of the bomb. So they developed a program that was well funded, several hundreds of millions of dollars every year, called plowshares, in which they were going to turn the bomb into something positive. And so what can you do with the bomb? Well, damn it, we need another Panama Canal. And so they had actually worked up a system where they could detonate bombs across the Isthmus of Panama. They had a whole plan called, I think, Project Chariot in Alaska, where they were going to create a harbor in Alaska and a historical Indian Inupiaq First Nations area with 5 nuclear bombs. I mean, and they downplayed the radiation. But here they had a hammer, and by gosh, we're looking for a nail. We got this atomic bomb. By gosh, let's use that puppy. We have these models. By gosh, these models have to work. And the best answer is just to go back, look at the river and say that, the river wants to be a certain way, going back and forth. And when you intrude comprehensively, and you have to look at if you're killing Peter by putting that concrete there, it's going to affect Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to somewhat, be the river and kind of figure out where it's going. And I'm not saying you can't build along a river. I'm a boater. I like to have marinas. But every time you have a hard edge, or every time you have a hard, a very demanding footprint, you're going to have some problem someplace else.
Yeah, it reminds me, I think another example might be wanting to control things like that. I think a long time ago, people were more comfortable, understood human nature better, so they were fine with letting kids run around and play. But now It's like, we got to control them, and then there's all these problems that just snowball from there, and then you have to try to come up with other controls, like, oh, we're going to take away their recess. Oh, and then some kid acts up, just like a river acting up.
Yeah.
And instead of and then they blame it on the kid and beat them or whatever and try to make them do what they want instead of grasping, oh, we are the ones that are wrong. The kid's just acting according to their nature and doing what should be done and what humans have done for millennia. Okay, how can we adjust and be consistent with nature, with children? We should do that too. Same thing with the rivers. But yeah, there's all these problems kids have nowadays. It's not necessary. It's not genetic. It's bad ideas in the culture, trying to control and make reality conform to us instead of whatever we want, instead of submitting to the laws of the world and realizing this is what we got to do, like it or not.
And letting kids fail.
Yeah.
And letting them fall down. It's just letting them it has to happen. Now the fall tends to be people. It's bigger now, I guess, but it's always been big. And I have to really do a better job of teaching this. A bad result is a result that's just as good as a good result.
Mm-hmm.
That really doesn't sound correct, but anyway, people have to fail. Fail is a part of learning, and if you fail on the small ones, you may not, fail on the big ones.
Yeah,
you can do that.
I think people need to look at the bigger picture of, instead of looking at something as failure or an injury, well, when they only do that, when they think too narrowly, too much in isolation, they're missing the bigger picture of how a kid is learning to identify and control risk. What can they do and what they cannot do? Yep. Kind of like putting concrete in. A problem a lot of people do, the way they control streams, is looking at stuff in isolation.
We up here, our solution, there's kind of a joke with this, but I don't know what the question is about the stream, but the answer is large woody debris. And so we put large woody debris everywhere because it doesn't come down naturally, and it's a little softer and looks nicer than concrete.
Yeah,
but it is a control, and it does take a lot of engineering to do it. But again, we have homes along the sides of water courses, and so if that river is meandering, then you have to say, okay, we've got all this development we have to protect. And even though it may be wiser and more cost effective just to move that development on the other side for a while, we don't have the tools or the culture to do that, where our native brothers and sisters did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so
that's one thing that's kind of ironic too, as how some people look at us as all advanced, and in some ways we are. In some ways, the culture is great, but not in every way. I think some so-called primitive cultures have some much better ideas and are much more advanced in some things than we are today.
Well, and I think they're becoming disconnected also in a way. But I think that if you look at, before white man came with just the tribes and how they lived with their environment, they certainly understood it. They were a part of it. And we've lost that connection. Somehow we think that An urban area is fixed. It's not self-correcting. It's amazing, and we really have to have wonder and awe when we go out to the forest and say, look, at this area is self-correcting. This area is living, and it's self-correcting. And it's changing. And our cities are not. When we have coastal cities, they're now being encroached by rising seas and infiltration of all of their pipes by acidic water now. They're going to have to move. These cities, coastal areas, are going to have to move. And then they're going to have to move again. Then they have to move again. How do we build environments that are self-correcting? I mean, if we have areas here that are some farms next to our oceans that are becoming alkaline and are becoming, so as the salt water rises, the soils are becoming more alkaline. And they're having a very, very difficult time kind of adjusting to that. Well, that's going to be that way. So maybe that land should be land for an urban area for a while until the seas become too high, and areas that are now in development that were prime farmlands next to river is where the farmland should be. And so, and we've talked about transfer of development rights and all sorts of ways of moving property and having a little more flexibility in our built environment. But we have a long way to go. The best plan, I think, is kind of one of your neighbors, or sort of one of your neighbors. Yeah, maybe it's. So Tampa's not one of your neighbors. No. Anyway, but when you look from up here in Seattle down there, but anyway, so Tampa has a great little plan. As the seas rise, they have these priority redevelopment areas, and as storms occur, where increases in density will be set farther back from the water course. And those areas close to the water will remain their densities, have lower densities, and as they sort of lose their functionality because of raising seas, those development rights will be moved farther inland. Now, I think they have the priority redevelopment areas. I don't know if they've adopted the development right part of it, but there are places that are toying with the idea of making environments that are flexible.
Interesting.
And structures that are, somewhat complementary to the changing landscapes that are occurring, not just because of climate change, they've always occurred, but certainly we're upping the rheostat in terms of the level of change and speed of change because of our changing climate.
And then, it's like, instead of trying to have something fixed and expecting to dictate to reality or nature the way it should behave, which isn't going to happen. Nature adapts. Things evolve. We got evolution, adaptation in the world. We have earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, reminding us of that fact. So it'd be better if we learned.
But we also have a tree. We also have a tree. The tree is breathing. The tree is growing another tree. The tree is self-correcting. The tree is. We can just marvel at a tree. And it's certainly a way to be connected within your own environment. And there's a whole bunch of research being done on trees, not just because they sequester carbon, but they do a lot of things. I mean, trees in a watershed, the root systems cleanse the water, they filter it, they create habitat for other things. So, and they're, trees stay there for a while, so you can kind of plan around them. At least your time horizons are a little larger than if it was just grasses. But I think that, trees, healthy forests do not burn with the same intensity that unhealthy ones do.
Yeah, right.
So.
And how can, what are some ways that people could decrease the destruction, decrease the hazards and risks of living along a creek? Because, like ours, as I say, we've had Hurricane Harvey, major rainfall, And
Now,
there's necessarily going to be some flooding, no matter how much concrete, more than usual. But we've had some flooding before that. So what are some ways that the hazards and risks along the creek could be minimized?
well, I mean, there are hazards to the creek, and then the hazards of the creek to us, I guess. Obviously, the hazards to the creek are just, when you don't let the natural diversity and complexity of the stream kind of rule and let it kind of be. Try to control that. That's certainly a hazard when you put pollutants into it. In terms of the stream to us, I think that we have to look at ways that we can have the lightest footprint possible. I mean, I think there are ways, to elevate homes on piles and stilts that may be better. Even floating environments may be better than, concrete that make impermeable areas. There's a whole discussion of LID. LID means local improvement district, but it also means low impact development, where you can have permeable development that has a built environment that has the characteristics of a meadow in terms of its ability to absorb water. And I think they work very well in certain areas. And they have a little more flexibility, but they are still not dynamic. I mean, they're not self-correcting environments, but they have certainly a smaller footprint. We have permeable, you have forest, you have swales, you have permeable soils, or permeable infrastructure that, even though you're living in a house that may be of concrete, the environment has the same hydraulic characteristics as a meadow. And there's been some success with that in areas near the rivers. And I don't think it's any more expensive, but it's certainly different. And also having homes that are mobile. I mean, you can have, in areas that have a tremendous problem, such as Bangladesh, with sea level rise and increase in storms, there's a whole community that are starting to build with schools and everything on floating platforms. The Dutch are doing this on floating platforms, and also amphibious homes, that areas that are normally dry but can become wet, and when they become wet, the homes float up, and instead of putting them on stilts, they float. But these are all attempts to create a dynamic built environment in a dynamic natural environment, and how you can kind of reminds me of I don't know why this came up. Remember Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali in I think it was the Rumble in the Jungle against Foreman, where he went into rope-a-dope. Does that ring a bell at all to you? So Muhammad Ali was getting older.
Yeah.
And so what he did is he decided that what he would do is wear the other opponents off. So what he did, he allowed himself to be hit. But what he did is he hung along the ropes. And it was a brilliance from a physics standpoint. So as he was hit, the energy was absorbed in the rope.
Wow.
So it was like he was in a huge slingshot. And when he was hit, he went back and he was absorbed in the rope. And he could withstand a tremendous amount of blows, because if I would hit you, which I wouldn't do, mainly because you hit me back, but you would stiffen up, right? If I hit you in the stomach, you would stiffen your stomach and you'd probably lean forward to the punch. That's a natural reaction. But what he did is he leaned up against the rope, and when he was hit, the rope absorbed the energy. He kind of relaxed, and he won the fight because he had energy toward the end when his opponent had completely become exhausted, beating the heck out of him.
Interesting.
And so, but again, it just psychologically, how do we have an environment, a built environment that we can live in, that can take advantage of basic physics and live in a world that's changing, in a landscape that's changing. And that's always been our big question. But communities change. Communities change because they modernize. They change because you have additional people that go in. Communities can adapt. Maybe we don't have property rights. We don't have property rights that are assigned to a piece of property. You buy a property right, and that right can be used anywhere. You still own property, you own your house, but as the stream changes and as it washes away, or as you have increasing flooding, and the area you're living in is good for the next 20 years, and then sea level rise is going to take it away. Maybe you have a 20-year life for your house, and you buy a property right, and you live in that house for 20 years, and have your grandkids come to the beach. But then, if it washes away in a storm and the seas are going to rise to take it over, you transfer that development right someplace else.
Interesting.
Or maybe you buy buildings with life cycle costs. In Hawaii, I was looking at Hawaii. So I lived in Hawaii for a while, which we didn't go into. And I lived for about 7 years. And right along Waikiki Beach, down the beach, there's Kapiolani Park. And no, I think it's Kapiolani Park. It's been a long time. But anyway, there's a large park right between Diamond Head and between Waikiki. Anyway, I think it's Kapiolani. Anyway, in front of it are a bunch of condos, and the condos we were looking at, they were in the $400,000, $500,000 range. Well, Hawaii on the coast. Well, they were that range because they had leasehold interests that were going to be up in 20 years, 15 years. Well, actually, that's fine for me. I don't think I'm probably going to be living 20 years from now.
Yeah.
And so, but for my kids to come, that's a perfect thing. And so maybe we have areas that are built up in transitional zones because of climate, where you have people having the life cycle of the building is commensurate with the life cycle of that piece of property being able to have that building on it. And so, in 20 years, the lease is up. The part of my money, my taxes, goes to destroying the building. That now becomes a beach. And because the seas are high, you don't have to build, more and more infrastructure to keep the water out. And maybe that works in that case. Or maybe you have a person that lives along the beach and they don't own the land of the beach. They have a right to that beach for 20 years, but that right can be transferred someplace else. It can be sold on the market. And the whole idea of transfer and purchase of development rights can be looked at kind of globally. But we have to, because we have, pick a number, $33 billion going to New York Times, assets that are going to be extremely vulnerable in the next 20 years because of sea level rise and increased storms that are going to be beyond the limits of risk tolerance for the people that are there or not. And so how do you move those structures? The government's not going to buy them all. Insurance companies are very wise to this. They're not going to buy them. I spoke before an insurance commissioner, and insurance companies don't assume risk. They transfer risk. Mm-hmm. And so, so how do you do that? Well, I think we have to look at buildings with shorter life cycles. We have to look at transfer development rights. We have to look at temporary structures. We have to look at mobile structures, because we're not going to be able to build historically when we had a stable environment. The climate change is making what we thought was, cyclically stable, dynamically stable, stability into something that's not, something that is changing. And we're going to have to kind of address that.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be arduous. I mean, we have to stop climate change, but think of all the problems we can address. Think of all the new building and the new jobs that you can have. Think of the worst thing you can do is just say, I'm going to try to rebuild the infrastructure of the 1950s. But if you start to look at all sorts of things, you look at structures that are mobile, you look at making smaller utility districts, or utility districts that are have a micro scale and have wind and solar combined, and you look at all these things for our new environment, it can be a wonderful thing. Not as good as we've had it before, maybe in terms of opportunity, but it doesn't have to be. We have to do it. We don't have a choice.
Yeah, I think it'd be good if we'd advance more and have more ideas of adaptation and evolution, have that more influencing the way we think about cities and design, instead of, seems like the way people wear shoes and high heels, and sometimes it's fine, yeah, but they also deform our structure and our feet. And some of that seems to come, and like putting shoes on horses, some of that seems to come from wanting to be like the nobility of the Europeans. Big, huge Versailles and palaces and the pyramids of Egypt. And we got to have stuff that lasts forever and dominates the environment. But we'd be better off if we thought like the peasants or some of the others, and thinking and not trying to like dominate others, but having adaptive structures, working with the environment, working with other people, instead of trying to dominate people and tell them what to do and tell reality what to do.
Yeah. So I hope this was helpful.
Yeah.
Anything you haven't? And your question,
you opened up a whole new horizons.
Well, in your questioning before for your podcast or viewership, you gave a list of things you wanted to discuss. I don't think we've discussed any of them, but
that's all right. It was like, that's the way it goes sometimes. You don't know where the discussion's going to go.
The one thing it was failure. You asked me to talk about failure. And so part of my teaching are all the failures I've done while I was working. So that's part of it. So, but I was thinking what my biggest failure was, and I think it wasn't listening. I think that,
yeah.
So we spent a lot of money when I was with FEMA on moving 2 Alaskan villages, and from a river. And we did it because their old village was flooding. And so we moved the structures up on a hill. We had a winter camp to do it. It was very, very expensive, but there was no alternative, we thought. The river was changing course, and there was a hill. Well, when we moved them on the hill, they were disconnected to the river. And here was a culture of some were Athabascan, some were in a Yupik. One side of the river was Athabascan, one was in a Yupik. And we just didn't listen. They have slowly moved down there and spend most of their time, I think, in kind of fishing camp communities along the river and areas and structures that are mobile. And it seemed like a waste of money. What we should have done is said, we want to ignore our culture. We want to go to their culture. And we were bound by, for instance, HUD regulations. So the homes we had to build in Alaska in the rural villages had to be fitting of HUD requirements, because we were using HUD money in codes and cultures that were developed from Chicago. I mean, it just, and I think if we listened, we could have done something that was more attuned to their culture, more flexible and adaptable to that dynamic environment they're in, instead of trying to force a fixed village on extremely dynamic river that is just meandering all over the place, sediment rich. So I think that in many other areas where I think if I would have just sat back and put myself out of my culture and stepped back to look at it from a couple thousand feet and listened intensely, I think that my German stiff background nature would have been a little more Italian.
No, I think we got way back in history. We got the same stuff way back in us if we just reconnect. Adaptation, getting along, connecting with nature. It's just kind of lost through some like bad aspects of the culture, great aspects of the culture, but there are also some not so good aspects. But
and we had to figure out how to reconnect, like you're saying. How do we get our students out there to enjoy and feel and understand that it's okay to be cold. It's okay to be without water for a while. It's okay to, it's just life is this is part of life, and it's beautiful. And just to understand and internalize that forests, change, and they change for a good reason, and they evolve and they develop, and they, as I said, self-correct and self-organize. Just to understand that whole natural evolutionary process and feel it. And I think I'm going to do that more. I think I'm going to actually put in another field trip in our class.
Nice.
And require them to. Well, maybe that's wrong. That's my German coming out.
Yeah. Suggest.
You're going to be graded for enjoying the environment. If you really enjoy it, you get an A. If you sort of enjoy it, you get a B.
Yeah, I think that listening idea is good. I think a lot of people need to learn how to listen better. Just like some cultures have said, they got a saying, we got one mouth and two ears for a reason. We should listen twice as much as we talk.
Yeah.
Or more. But yeah, it's all over. Just listening to people in general, and then applies to nature too. Don't try to tell it what to do. Try to start listening, so to speak, to what it's telling you.
No, I think that's great. I mean, that's a great conclusion.
Cool.
But we don't have to conclude. I do have a meeting, in another 15 minutes or so.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well,
but did you want to continue longer?
Or maybe if we could pick up another day, that'd be great.
Okay. Why don't you see what kind of questions people have? And cool. This is kind of in a stream of consciousness. I'm not too sure if we've stayed on one topic at all, but it's been fun. I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. Me too. Thanks.
Okay.
So thanks for being willing to talk. And any last words, or we already summed up pretty well for folks?
Oh, I think we did too. I think cool. Maybe for all of our us parents and grandparents, just take the kids to the woods and let them fall down.
Yeah, true.
So
nice. All right, so hope you enjoyed that, folks. A lot of good food for thought there, getting deeper, getting philosophical, making some good connections there. Way beyond what you might have expected or what I was thinking we'd talk about. So it was a great discussion. But hope you enjoyed it, and we will talk to you all soon, folks. Thanks. Bye.
Michael, thank you very much. I've enjoyed this a lot.
Awesome.